Hello, second prep students. I hope you are all safe and sound. Today we are going to take Pride and Prejudice novel, Chapter 1. The novel begins at Longbourn, the place where the Bennets lived. Mrs. Bennet knew that Mr. Bingley rented Netherfield, and she was extremely excited when she knew that he was a single man of large fortune. Why was she excited? Because she wanted him to marry one of her daughters. She asked Mr. Bennet to go and pay him a visit in order to introduce himself and his daughters, but Mr. Bennet refused. After this, she knew that he secretly visited Mr. Bingley. She was very happy and she was surprised too. As politeness required, Mr. Bingley came to visit the Bennets a few days later. We said before that during this time, the families made balls in order to invite their relatives and their friends. That was the main place where the girls used to get introduced to the men in order to have suitors. Mr. Bennet suffered with Mrs. Bennet. He regretted marrying her. He said that he suffered with her for the last 23 years, which was the duration of their marriage. Why did he feel this? Because she was extremely foolish. She was very silly. He wasn't like her. He was totally different. And that's why they had different preferences in their girls. He preferred Elizabeth because she liked reading and she was very wise, whereas she liked Jane more because Jane was extremely beautiful. When Mr. Bingley paid them a visit, the girls hid behind the curtains and they watched him. They discovered that he was extremely handsome. After this, when they were invited to a ball in Meryton, the girls wanted to dance with him. All the girls wanted to dance with him. Who did he take with him to the ball? He took with him his two sisters, Mrs. Hurst and Caroline Bingley, and he also took with him his brother-in-law, Mr. Hurst, and Mr. Darcy. Who was Mr. Darcy? As we said before, Mr. Darcy was his very close friend. During the ball, he was socializing with everybody, dancing with the girls, talking with everyone, and he was very happy. As a foil to Mr. Bingley was Mr. Darcy. Mr. Darcy was extremely arrogant. He felt superior to country people. And he didn't talk to anyone. He stood alone, he didn't like to dance, and he didn't like to speak. So he was quite the opposite. Mr. Darcy was extremely rich, and that's why all the people wanted him to marry their daughters. So the first impression that was taken by the people there was of Mr. Bingley that he was cheerful and sociable, of Mr. Darcy that he was proud and disagreeable. Because the gentlemen were less than the ladies, Elizabeth did not have a partner for one of the dances. She was just sitting, watching. Mr. Darcy was standing near her. So Mr. Bingley asked Darcy to dance with Elizabeth. Bingley kept dancing with Jane and he loved her from the first sight. There was common interest between Bingley and Jane. So he suggested introducing Darcy to Elizabeth. Darcy refused and he said that she was not beautiful at all and that she couldn't tempt him. Elizabeth overheard the conversation unintentionally. She didn't mean to hear them, but she overheard them unintentionally. He said that she's not attractive enough to tempt him, and he asked Bingley to go back to his partner Jane and dance with her. This conversation did not endear Mr. Darcy to Elizabeth, but she told the story later on very cheerfully to her friends. So that was her first impression of Darcy, that he was an arrogant person. Mrs. Bennet was delighted with the effect Jane had on Bingley. She told her husband later that he danced with Jane twice. He danced with the rest of the girls once, but he danced with Jane twice. And she also said that Mr. Darcy was extremely rude to Elizabeth. But Elizabeth didn't care. When Jane and Elizabeth were alone, they discussed their dancing partners. So Jane said that she liked Bingley a lot. After that, we are introduced to Charlotte. We knew now that Elizabeth and Jane had two different characters. How? Elizabeth understood people very well, and her first impression always lasts. Whereas Jane was kind-hearted, but she was not wise enough. She couldn't understand people well. Charlotte believed that Jane should show her admiration to Bingley in order to win his heart. This is what she told her best friend Elizabeth when they discussed this topic together. Jane admitted that Bingley was good-mannered and agreeable. That was her opinion of him. After this, while observing Mr. Bingley's interest in Jane, Elizabeth hadn't noticed that Darcy had changed and that he was interested in herself. At first, he didn't consider her pretty at all, but later on, he changed his mind. He started to realize what a beautiful expression her dark eyes gave to her intelligent face. He believed that she had an attractive figure. To him, at first, she was only an unfashionable village girl. But later, he decided that her conversation was amusing. Whenever they met, they didn't speak. He only stood near her, listening to her and watching her closely. He wanted to know her better. He wished to know her better. After this, they were invited to another ball at the Lucas's house. That was the second ball. During this ball, Sir William Lucas suggested that Elizabeth and Darcy would dance together. Elizabeth, without giving it a second thought, she refused. After this, Darcy welcomed the idea, but she refused. As I told you, Darcy repeated his request, but she refused again. So he asked her to dance twice, and she refused twice. When Darcy admired her eyes, this aroused Caroline Bingley's jealousy. She felt extremely jealous of her. When she asked about his opinion, he said that he admired Elizabeth. And then she wanted him to speak more about Elizabeth. So she told him that she was sure that he was thinking about Elizabeth, that she was boring and that she was the same as all the country people, silly and boring. But that was not the truth. He told her that he was only thinking about the beauty of her eyes. When he said this, she told him that she was the one who would like to congratulate him first for choosing her as a bride, and she asked him, when will the wedding be? He said that that was only Caroline Bingley's imagination. and that her thoughts jumped from admiration to love to marriage in a moment, and he considered this silliness. So, here we got to know Caroline's opinion of the Bennets, that they were silly country people. But Darcy had another opinion. I hope you understood this chapter. Thank you so much.